Okay, please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Business and Housing Policy Committee on Tuesday, the 28th of November 2023 from the Walton Suite. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Batho, Chairperson of the committee. Some housekeeping points before we start. This meeting is recorded, live streamed, and will be available on the Council's YouTube channel. Number two, can everyone please ensure that your mobiles are on silent? And third one, in the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all instructions given to you by our team. Can I welcome everyone to the meeting this evening? And for those registered to speak, I'll invite you forward when it's time for you to make your contribution. So turning to the agenda. First item is apologies and deputy members. I believe we have Councillor Isaacs, who's unable to make it, and Councillor Horrell is deputising. Good evening, Councillor Horrell. And then on to declarations of interest. Are there any members of the committee who would like to give any declarations of interest? No, thank you very much. There are no announcements for this meeting. So we move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 19th of September 2023. Can I ask members if those are agreed, please? Thank you. On item 5 of public participation, we have two people who'd like to speak, I understand. Julian Perkins on behalf of TACT on item or agenda item 6, and then Councillor Lee, who'd like to speak on both item 6 and item 7. Okay, I'll ask you to come to the table as each of those items are sort of called as part of the agenda. Thank you. Okay, we move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is the first of our papers. This is the Housing Revenue Account, Rent Setting and Business Plan. I'd like to hand over to Councillor Westwood to introduce this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware that at least 3 of the councillors around the table in front of me are new this year into the council and probably not familiar with the HRA, so I'll go through this in a little bit of detail. So apologies to those of you that know the ins and outs of the HRA, but I just think it's worth setting the scene so you know what the account is and what it's there for. So the HRA exists primarily to provide affordable council housing to our district and to maintain that housing and to grow that housing stock and to look after our tenants that are in that stock. So the HRA is experiencing an unprecedented financial challenge at present. This is of a magnitude never seen in the sector since we took over responsibility for self-financing our social housing business from the previous government subsidy scheme back in 2012. The Housing Revenue Account is operated as a ring-fenced landlord account for the provision of social housing to our tenants. It must self-finance, and to ensure financial sustainability, the rents and service charges must be sufficient to fund the expenditure incurred to own, operate, and continually invest in the properties. The financial planning horizon for the HRA is 30 years. It must annually produce a viable 30-year business plan to demonstrate its ability to self-finance and to show it has the capacity for ambitions to deliver new affordable homes for people across the district. So looking at the cost side of the HRA business plan, draft plan that we bring to the meeting this evening for 24-25, we are in a period of high inflation, which is slowly reducing, with interest rates that are higher than experienced over many decades. In addition, building costs have increased by 23% over the last year and 58% over the last 2 years. We have to prioritise how and where we spend our tenants' money to deliver best value. And it's right that we now have 2 significant work programmes that both improve the quality and comfort of our existing housing stock, alongside delivering more highly energy efficient new homes. The cost of living crisis has not gone away, and it's hitting our most vulnerable tenants hard. We're proud to have over 5,000 council homes in the Winchester district. To improve the energy efficiency of our homes, we are investing £45 million into retrofitting the fabric of our council homes to lower tenants' energy costs, reduce carbon emissions, and to provide warmer and more comfortable homes. Looking at repairs and maintenance, we are investing an additional £2 million on an annual basis, reflecting inflation, increased service demand, improved void standards, and resourcing the staffing capacity of the existing team to deliver decent homes. There is a need to modernise the services through better digital access and improved business processes to deliver the level of customer service people expect. We have allocated a provisional sum of £2 million over the next 2 years to review the existing housing management system and also to retender for the repairs and maintenance contract, which expires in 2 years' time. The HRA business plan that we're asking you to review is a viable and sustainable business plan, which not only includes investment of £45 million to go greener faster by retrofitting our homes to bring them up to decent home energy efficient standards, but it also reaffirms our commitment to the 1,000 homes target, albeit over a slightly longer time period. The HRA business planning is carried out annually, and all assumptions are revisited and undertaken afresh each year. When the economic situation improves, with interest rates and building costs at more reasonable levels, we will aim to deliver our 1,000 homes target earlier, and indeed look to exceed that number. In order to be viable, the business plan assumes several changes in strategy from previous years. These are detailed in the report, but in summary, they include proposals to continue the new approach of acquiring more homes from developers alongside our previous approach of building new homes ourselves. A move to 80% market rents for our brand new eco-friendly homes that will require up to 70% less energy to heat them. A £400,000 revenue savings plan for the housing service. Investment to digitalise and modernise processes to make them more accessible, simpler, quicker and easier for our customers. Also to make it possible for contact to be online 24/7 for those who prefer it. Looking at the income side for the HRA, we're currently assuming a rent increase in 24-25 will be subject to the government advised limit of CPI plus 1% based on the September 2023 CPI index of 6.7%. However, we are still awaiting the government to confirm this. In addition, the report proposes a number of additional measures. A move towards full cost recovery for service charges subject to consultation and a review of costs. The proposal to move to rent increases being based on CPI plus 1% for shared owners in the HRA from the current RPI plus 1%, and disposals of surplus assets to help fund the increased greener, faster capital investment in our existing homes. Despite the challenging circumstances we face, I believe there's a strong plan that addresses those circumstances whilst improving the service and housing we make available to the current and future tenants who rely on them. I'm looking forward and welcome your comments and views on the draft HRA business plan this evening, which following this meeting will be updated with the comments also received from scrutiny and also with the government guidance on rent level when available. The final HRA business plan will look for approval at the March 2024 council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. And before we move on to questions, I'd just like to ask Simon Hendy to present a couple of slides which summarise the options and the policy that we're here to review. So thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Just wait for the slides to come up. There's only 2 slides here. We just thought it might be helpful in terms of summarising the 2 main issues being presented to the committee this evening. The first one, obviously, is looking at the rent increase for the next financial year. So this is a high-level summary that you'll find in your report, which summarises the predicted expenditure on providing the housing service and predicted income on the basis of rents being set at 7.7%, as Councillor Westwood said. That's an assumption at the moment because we haven't had the government guidance on that. That's based on CPI plus 1% in September. Eagle-eyed amongst you will have worked out that the expenditure in the housing revenue account next year is predicted to be 37.926 million. Income in total 36.476 million based on that assumed rent increase. So a deficit on the housing revenue account in 24-25, and at the moment the proposals are to bridge that deficit by looking at identifying £318,000 worth of savings, using interest on balances of £492,000, and funding the remaining deficit from balances. Balances change over the life of the business plan, but the idea is to bring forward £640,000 next year. That's the first issue confronting committee this evening. If I can move on to the second slide. Yes, the second bit is the broader 30-year business plan. As Councillor Westwood has set out, some very high-level policy objectives for the 30-year business plan to deliver EPCC to the all the housing stock to 2030, requiring an additional £30 million worth of investment, so a total of £45 million worth of investment on work to improve the energy efficiency of all the housing stock, maintaining, delivering the decent home standard, increasing the repairs and maintenance expenditure, and delivering the new homes programme of 1,000 homes by 2032-33. The report sets out some policy options to achieve that, as Councillor Westwood has already said, changing the new homes development strategy to moving towards acquiring properties as well as building. So looking at securing Section 106 affordable housing obligations, because by and large, some of those opportunities will be cheaper and more cost effective than new build ourselves. Setting rents at 80% of market rents if we can achieve EPCB on our new homes programme, and the report goes on to explain how actually that will not disadvantage tenants because of the high energy rating of those homes, reducing the running costs. Already mentioned the savings in the housing revenue account, £318,000 in 24-25 and a further £82,000 in the year after, giving a total of £400,000 over 2 years. Councillor Westwood also mentioned developing a disposals programme. The report makes clear starting the disposal of Barnes House, which we've assessed as not economic for us to refurbish and bring up to the standards required. Also disposals programme around small one-off plots of land, and also void properties that come up that again are not economic for us to invest in and achieve the required standards. And lastly, a move towards full cost recovery for service charges subject to consultation and review of costs. So I don't know whether that would be useful to keep those slides up as the committee has the debate over the report, following some of the questions some of the other members might have.
Thank you, Simon. Before we move on to questions from members, I'm just wondering if Mr. Perkins would like to make any comments at this point on behalf of TACT.
Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I like to refer you to the public document pack on page 17 that states consultation and recent tenant satisfaction survey results indicate to a need to improve customer digital access and service, and it links into the repair and maintenance contract, which needs to be renewed in the next 2 years. I might be being premature here, but the provisional budget of £2 million is a huge sum of money. And so at this stage, this is really a request that when determining the actions required to bring the service back into line with particularly the tenant satisfaction survey, that the council recognises that many older tenants, the digital world is a scary place, with access to and the understanding of it fairly limited. For these tenants, face-to-face engagement is really, really important. And from my own observations and comments from other tenants, there seems to be lacking this face-to-face ability currently. They don't want bots or recorded messages. They want to be able to speak to people. And so the request really is that when developing the resources to provide the improvements the council wishes, it will recognise that additional front-facing staffing will be valuable in improving communication and complaint handling. This also goes, of course, for the new contract, which again would benefit from more front-facing staffing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor West, would you like to respond to that at this point or later in the?
At this point, if I may. Thank you. Julian, I thank you very much for bringing that those questions to this meeting, because that is such an important point. My father lived till he was 90, and I barely struggled to get him to use anything other than old-style Nokia phone. Smartphones were behind him. All banks had doors and not a keypad to get in. And I'm absolutely on your page about we have to provide the access to the service and the support you need in the way that works for you. And you're one of many people that we've got in our houses and homes across the district that require that level of service. And you know, the commitment is, I believe I can speak on behalf of the team over there, that will continue. We will provide a human face for you to deal with. In terms of the £2 million and set aside there in terms of improving our services, it covers a couple of things. Firstly, it covers potential changes to our IT systems. So we also have, you know, probably 3,500 people who expect to be able to use their smart apps and phones to be able to contact us, and they do like to report problems at 1 a.m. and things like this. So we do need to provide the proper digital access to a lot of people. If we've got repairs booked in, then people like to see it like on your phone. If you've got a parcel delivery, you know, where is my support person? He's half an hour away and things like that. So we have to go down that path to provide those facilities. Equally, we have a repair contract at the moment with a supplier, and we need that supplier also to work in different ways, whether it be to people like yourself and personal service and also remote service. So part of that £2 million is also looking at the contract that we have with our suppliers and make sure we've got the right contract with the right supplier in place to provide the range of services at the right cost and the right value that we need. If I can turn to Mrs. Knight, could you just say a few words on the staff that are out working with our sheltered accommodation, assisted accommodation, extra care accommodation, because that will be maintained, and you're already a recipient of some of that, and that is not impacted by this particular programme, but it will be impacted by our general programmes to improve our service overall. But just an outline of the service that we do provide and will provide. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. We're very keen to make sure that we maintain that personal contact with tenants, and we have so many different issues around the breadth that we do with housing. So where we're looking at contractors and repairs and the more operational work, then I think a digitalisation will help most tenants. With regards to the other items the other areas that we support people in through our sheltered housing, extra care, our tenancy sustainment team, our neighbourhood team, there will still be those officers, those face-to-face opportunities, and there will be the opportunity, you know, people will be on estates. We're certainly, as you know, looking at changing our tenant engagement process to make sure that we're coming out to tenants. We're not expecting tenants to come to us. So we're looking at lots of different opportunities to engage, particularly to target tenants if there are certain issues going on. So we've done some work around that with antisocial behaviour, so that we then have an event on the estate with, you know, some sort of incentives for people to come out and chat to us. So we'll certainly have that balance with the housing management module that we use. It identifies people's needs and communication needs. We will always have those, and we'll always make sure that there's an opportunity for people to contact us outside of digital options. So I'm confident we'll be able to do that. Got to get a bit better at it, but yeah, I'm confident that we're looking at that over the next couple of years with the way that we're looking at our digital transformation. We certainly want to take the tenants on the journey with us, so we'll be doing lots of consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Councillor Lee, I was wondering if you would like to come and ask your question at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'll go straight into it. I've quite a lot to cover. So good news on the rise in the local housing allowance. So my first question is, what will this mean for the forthcoming report to set rent and the HRA in February 2024? I'd also like to congratulate the housing team and Councillor Westwood for the proposed Fabric First programme with funding of 45 million over the 8 years, with the consideration of environmental factors. However, I am concerned and not convinced there is an absolute commitment to build and retrofit better for our climate nature crisis declaration. Very worrying given the latest UN climate report for the UAE COP climate talks in a few days' time. The report, titled 2023 Emissions Gap Report, broken record, temperatures hit new highs, yet world fails to cut emissions again, finds the world is heading for a temperature rise beyond the Paris Agreement. The 2030 greenhouse gas emissions must fall by 28% for the Paris Agreement 2 degrees pathway and 42% for the 1.5 degree pathway. These are global figures and are equally high for the UK. This is very troubling. So my question is, second question, can I ask if our housing business approach can increase the quality of our housing building elements for the nature and climate challenges? Perhaps a new metric is needed. And by quality, I mean progressing to the least amount of non-fossil fuel manufactured building elements with a greater percentage of nature-based fabrics and materials. The cost of nature-based solutions has reduced and are now similar to an increasing range of traditional materials. Other facts to inform a quality metric would be to increase our thinking about the 400 million tonnes of materials that are consumed every year in the UK for construction. If you divide that equally, that's 6 tonnes per person per year. And if you think about waste, tonnes of waste that are generated by the UK construction industry, that's 120 million. Modern methods of construction and/or better materials and design and build approaches would help shift us away from these extreme resource and waste stats, plus reduce costs. We should remember that 90% of non-fuel minerals extracted in the UK for construction, stone, aggregates, sand, plus clay for bricks, making large quantities of limestone and clay mined and burned at high temperatures to make cement, are not sustainable. So my third question, the council is committed to building 1,000 homes by 2030. That's absolutely brilliant, great. With this target in mind, can we improve our sustainable procurement process and contracts with these challenges? We need to avoid solving one problem, the quantity of housing, only to contribute to increasing major environmental impacts elsewhere and locally. And I believe it's worth reflecting on our guide to sustainable procurement, which highlights we spend considerable sums on diverse range of goods and services and works. Winchester economy is very dependent on the public sector, including ourselves, Winchester Council. And I suggest our climate and nature emergency declarations in the context of housing provides an opportunity to lead a step change for better low carbon and high nature outcomes. A shift away from procurement business as usual alongside our new local plan, end of 2025, will help push our district infrastructure away from this high fossil fuel housing and weak nature-based approach. And using evidence-based modern methods of construction practices, which is likely to be a good enabler as well for the many new builds and retrofit situations we'll find we have to deal with. So my final question, in view of what I've just said and the mounting environmental concerns, can I ask for consideration of a three-point approach to evolve an even better housing business plan by 1, building, retrofitting fast and better with a higher quality focus. 2, perhaps considering pooling housing budgets and coordinating with neighbouring local authorities for economy of scale, better eco standards and skills. I mean, this will assist shortcomings in the local supply chains, which have been mentioned tonight. And there are much needed skills which are in absolute shortage. Modern methods of construction and the creation of a carbon baseline and nature improved simple metrics for decision making will, I'm sure, help considerably. And all anchored in an upgraded retrofit and build housing contracts for the forthcoming reprocurement review, which is mentioned at Para 11.19. And I suggest this approach or similar provides a long-term, viable, sustainable gain for housing and our environment and avoids short to medium-term pain. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Westwood, would you like to respond to any or?
I believe Mr. Hendy would like to first go at this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the first question was around the impact of the increase in the local housing allowance. So we're hoping to get information of that in the new calendar year. The impact of that will be, and I'm sure later on this evening the committee is going to debate the proposal to set the rents for our new build properties at 80%. That will be, at the moment, that will be above the existing local housing allowance. Local housing allowance are roughly about 70%. So if the LHA is increased, it means that those households that need housing benefit in their housing element of the universal credit, that will go up, which means more of the rent will be covered by benefit. So that will broadly be the impact. It won't have an impact on cost, it'll have an impact on our customers getting more help if they need it towards their housing costs. That will be positive and will address some of the concerns the committee might have about the rents being set at a higher level than LHA at the moment. The other questions were around the retrofit work, and I have to admit I'm not close to the specification of what we're doing in terms of insulation materials and that, but that's definitely something we'll take away and look into to see if there's ways in which we can address that within the existing cost envelope and move towards that. I think the third bit was around in terms of new build and modern methods of construction. Yes, we should definitely look to see if there are other housing providers, not just local authorities, but also registered providers that are doing. It would have to be land-led schemes, so schemes that they're doing themselves that we can buddy up with, agree house build types which will be consistent, so we can go down the MMC route, factory construction, reduce costs because of the increase of demand. So that's something we'll definitely investigate as well.
Chair, can I just add a little bit to that? But I haven't consulted with Mr. Hendy about this or Mrs. Knight, but also it may be in terms of the building costs, it might be something that we want to factor into our housing strategy that we're also putting together at the moment, and it might be a relevant item in that.
Thank you, Councillor Lee, for your contribution there. I'd like to now move on to questions from members. I'd just like to remind us that the recommendation for this paper is that the Policy Committee are asked to note and comment on the policy options for the 2024-25 Housing Revenue Account, HRA rent setting, and the HRA business plan. So can I ask you to ask questions and focus on that as the objective of the remainder of the questions. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a few, but I'm going to take the biggest first. It's to do with wastewater treatment plants. I would like to know to what degree the HRA is subsidising private housing served by our wastewater treatment plants. I like to have numbers, as you know, but I welcome the opportunity to go to full cost recovery and also to consult on how it's done, because I know it is it's a burden on those in rural areas, and that includes most of my ward. I would ask though, could we actually look at how the costs are shared? at the moment for these systems. At present, a 1-bedroom bungalow is charged the same as a 3 or indeed a 4-bedroom house. Mrs. Knight and I have been discussing this. I understand Mrs. Knight's explanation that we don't monitor the water intake, so we can't monitor the water output. But I do feel that is seen as a burden on smaller houses where they do use less water. And thirdly, Chairman, could we have assurance that the costs of removing nutrients from our wastewater treatment plants, that there will not be an increase in maintenance costs, and thus that cost will not fall upon tenants and residents? Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Westwood.
Thank you. I'm going to leave the numbers question to Mr. Hendy because I don't have access to those numbers presently. I'll talk about what we want to do though, Councillor Powell, because we need to look at we've got over 50 water treatment works, and we need to look at each one in detail and the connections that they have. And they're a combination of cesspit and small water treatment works, as you know, and the costs for each of those are different. And you know, it's no surprise that we've ended up with 50 water treatment works like this when the water industry was privatised and the major companies said we don't want those, right? So we have them for good or bad. So we have to do our due diligence on this before we can thoroughly understand exactly what the costs are and what the charges are and how they relate. But I'll leave numbers specific to Mr. Hendy, and that might be something that is coming out of the work that we're doing rather than available here. Secondly, how costs are shared. I think we all know that your costs for water were based on the rateable value of your house, and then over the last 20 years, we've all had water meters put in, and we now live in a country which is a mix of rateable value and water meters, depending where you are. And where we provide the sewage treatment, we do not provide the clean water. The clean water may or may not be metered onto the way into our house, but certainly it's not. We don't meter the sewage on the way out. So I think what we need to do with that is to take that into our a study that we need to do, into the consultation process, into the reviews that we're doing, and look at the way we fairly and equitably charge for the use of the water treatment services that we provide and the connections to them. And how that will be done, I don't yet know, but we need to factor that into our consultations and our piece of work. I think it was just the numbers question.
There was a third point, Chairman, about
which was the nutrients, sorry, the cost of nutrients and the maintenance. The way that we are upgrading 2 water treatment plants at the moment, and just to give it a plug, both of those will be upgraded before the end of this year. And Winchester City Council will be putting less pollution and less nutrients into the Itchen Valley through upgrading these water treatment works, and that's the most important thing. In terms of how they work, then they're kind of a double separation method, and the way I've been briefed on this, I understand it, is that once they are installed, they work without further additional maintenance associated with them. And so it is a second process that will take the nutrients out of the water. I stand to be corrected if I'm incorrect, Mr. Hendy, but I'm not aware of any additional maintenance costs. And the water that comes out at the end is tested periodically, sent off for labs to ensure that it's of the right quality and the nutrients are at the right level, and that is exactly the same process that happens today.
Thank you, Chair. If I can come back. So you may well be aware from the report we had to model a particular scenario in relation to sewage treatment work costs, and we modelled the costs of all the sewage treatment works and the private income at the moment, recovering that over a 5-year period. Just to reassure you though, we have the granularity of every sewage treatment work, the number of private connections to it, the number of tenants. So we have that level of granularity to determine where all the costs fall. The overall subsidy provided by the housing revenue account to private connections to sewage treatment works at the moment runs at £166,000 a year. So although we've modelled it over 5 years, there's likely, as the recommendation that exists at the moment, likely to be consultation, review of costs and review of how that will be recovered. We have the granularity, the detail in each individual case to determine how that will take place.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to ask a couple of questions. Although obviously we've been through some of this before today, but there are some sort of moving pieces, as it were. And whilst I'm absolutely aligned with the high level policy objectives, there are some elements to just clarify, and you may not be able to do this at this time, that may impact us. The local housing allowance, I think, change is obviously important. When you set this paper out originally, you didn't know that was going to be amended. And also understanding the implications of the 80%. It's helpful on your chart tonight to confirm that it is an EPC B rating and for a new tenant. So if someone's going into a current council house that has a lower rating, they would not be expected to have the 80%. But my question to you around that 80% is just, are we still looking and nuancing that given some of these other factors that we're now aware of? And then the second element that is just rattling in my brain is the disposal strategy. And I understand completely that some properties just may not be sensible for us to actually update and bring to standard. But at the same time, we have that whole balance of temporary accommodation and our review of the temporary accommodation estate at the moment, but also that councils are being impacted in their temporary accommodation by additional individuals looking for support, whether they're coming out of those seeking asylum or refugees, or others moving maybe out of some of the hotel accommodation, not necessarily here but in other areas, and just making sure that we as a district have that in our mind. And do we have that, again, that balance of where those individuals may come from? We're not really something we can entirely plan for, but are we being sufficiently flexible and have a backstop should we need that? So linking disposals and temporary accommodation review to make sure that we end up with the right estate for a future that we're maybe not entirely sure of. So just a couple of questions about moving pieces, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Orrell. Councillor Westwood would like to respond to that, or was Mr. ND?
No, I'll start. In terms of the 80% rent set at 80% market rate, we have outlined the model in the paper, and we're very confident that those numbers do stack up. And so when you say EPCB, and I'm looking for a nod of head and a confirmation, we're talking about the new builds that we've got, like North Whiteley, Winnell Flats. We're not talking about retrofitting a house that we have that's currently in our stock and saying it's now EPCB, therefore we're putting the price up as soon as we get a new tenant in there. That is not the case. These are highly LNG efficient, brand new buildings that are built to a standard that I'd love to have on my own property myself. And they are beautifully done out, very comfortable and very warm, to the point where there was a house at North Whiteley, it was last year about this time, someone moved in and they said, and put the heating off 2 weeks. So we're looking at places that are really energy efficient, and those are the sorts of homes we're talking about. So we are looking to set the rent at 80% and on those houses. Numbers of them, probably 150-ish houses in our portfolio, something like that, will be with the Winnell Flats and North Whiteley, somewhere around that number. but we want to build more and more houses of that standard and homes of that standard. So it's we're getting to. So 80% is the number on which we're modelling the business plan at the moment. The disposal strategy. There are no empty properties at the moment other than going through void, right? So we have temporary accommodation at the moment. Requests for temporary accommodation, I think it's up 25% this year. We carefully monitor that number. We are using very little bed and breakfast, so we're able to accommodate the temporary accommodation at this moment in time. And we do have a piece of work that is ongoing, which will report in February next year on a temporary accommodation strategy looking forwards over the next 2 to 3 years in this district. And we're aware of some challenges that may come next year and the year after in terms of funding from Hampshire County Council or other agencies. So there is a new temporary accommodation strategy that you will see come to various committees at the beginning of next year. And in terms of linking that to the disposals we're talking about are strips of land that we don't feel are economically viable to develop, and we'll be looking to dispose of those and use that income to fund areas of the HRA, whether that be new homes or into existing homes and upgrading to decent home standards, etc. In terms of properties, then we're looking at, as Mr. Hendy said in his opening statements, at properties that come up void, which are financially not viable to retrofit going forwards. So we're not looking at wholesale sell-off here. We're looking at only disposing of those that are financially not good for us to take forwards, and we'd be better banking the money and moving it into other areas of the HRA, whether that be new homes or improving our existing homes. So there's no specific linkage between the two, but I understand why you can see the linkage there. But that is the current strategy. Don't know if there's anything else Mr. Hendy or Mrs. Knight would like to add.
If I can, Chair, there's a slight linkage between disposal of some properties and new homes programme. In the current context of very high interest rates, every £100,000 capital receipt mitigates £5,000 worth of revenue costs. And if we sell a property for £300,000, the average amount of subsidy required to return a new home is about £100,000. It means, in effect, by selling that one property for £300,000, we can finance 3 new build properties of a better quality. So there is a link between the two, but as Councillor Westwood said, we'll only be looking at those properties which have a high capital value, but also a high need for us to invest, because the economics then will work in our favour to dispose, generate a capital receipt, mitigate borrowing, be able to invest in the housing stock at a better quality.
Right, Councillor Price. Yes. Thank you, Chair. I'd like, if I can, just to ask a couple of questions more from a tenant's point of view in this meeting. First of all, it's clear, and you talked to the cost of living crisis in your opening remarks. It's clear that by investing in more affordable housing and making housing that we have more energy efficient, we're going to be helping with bills and the cost of running those properties. I'm interested to know how else we're helping tenants during the cost of living crisis that's going on. And also, another really important thing is should not just be providing affordable housing, but there are places where people want to live because it's near their family or near their kids' schools. In the provision of housing, are we being mindful of the areas that we're providing those houses in as well? Councillor Westwood.
Yep. So in terms of helping with the cost of living crisis, I'm going to turn to Mrs. Knight in a minute for numbers, but we have a fantastic tenant sustainment team, and we kind of pride ourselves on the fact that if someone is struggling to pay their rent, we try not to evict them. You know, we'll try very hard to help them get to a point where they can afford their rent. And this is the remit of the Tenant Sustain team. And they have a fantastic track record of helping people stay in their properties despite the fact that they're struggling through the cost of living and elsewhere. And Mrs. Knight, could you just outline some of the numbers there? Thank you.
Between our tenancy sustainment team and our income team, we make every effort possible to maximise people's income. It's quite incredible that some people, pensioners particularly, don't always claim pension credit. So we have teams that absolutely concentrate on that by doing expenditure. We actually managed to save our tenants £250,000 last year, generate that income for them. So, you know, it was really quite impressive. The income team also have other funds available to them that can help. We have an assist fund and a welfare fund where, you know, we are aware that some of our tenants that move into their properties could immediately go into debt from scrupulous borrowers needing white goods, furniture, etc. So we work really closely with Scratch, our charities. We take we have a store of furniture ourselves, so we've helping tenants in many ways with white goods and all sorts of other things. We've also are doing the softer work around, you know, this summer holidays just gone. We helped people. I can't remember what it's called. Can you, Councillor? What was it
Summer
called?
munchies.
Summer munchies. So we helped the tenants with that. So we were helping people with that would normally have free school meals. We were providing meals for them, but we were doing it in a very kind of non-judgmental way, worked closely with our parish council. So I do think the officers worked really hard to try and support our tenants. And as Councillor Westwood said, we really don't evict. It's very last resort for us as a landlord. We have very few evictions. So.
Okay, and picking up on your second point, homes in the right places. There's 2 points to this. First, if someone comes on through Hampshire Home Choice and wants a council home, then we try to allocate homes in the region where they've got contacts or for a good reason they require to live. So we try to help in that respect. In terms of providing new homes, then the way we build homes, and we build homes across the district, all across the district, is quite good, actually, very good, actually, that we've got about a very large number in North Whiteley and down more in the southern parishes, which is a bit of a departure from building them all in around Winchester city area. So looking forwards, and because of the constraints on the money and because of the state of the building market where SME builders are going bust at the moment, big developers not taking their phased work forwards because of cash flow issues and so on. It is a good time for us as a council where we have funds available to build out new homes, for us to work closely with those developers. Now that might restrict us to some of the larger sites and not give us the diversity across the district. But it's something that Councillor Horrell and I have discussed as well, and she knows my view on this, that we also need to continue building out on exception sites and in other areas away from the big developers for 2 reasons. Firstly, we need to provide homes in different places across the district, and secondly, we need to use the right to buy money, which we can only use on building out our new homes. We can't use that money against Section 106 homes and so on. So we have to continue building. In our housing strategy, we talked about linking up more closely with the parish councils for identifying exception sites. So that will go through the housing strategy, and equally talked about setting up registered provider forums where we can meet with, talk to, influence and direct registered providers, and they're providing homes in the area. So not just council homes, but other organisations providing homes. So there's a variety of different ways, mechanisms for providing a range of homes across a range of areas in the district.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. I think Councillor Miller, you are next in terms of asking a question.
Thank you very much. My question is, are council considering going out and buying ex-council houses that come on the market? Because at the present moment, there's quite a few of them are a lot cheaper than the current build cost. Now, I know historically there's an argument about we're interfering with the market at the bottom end, but by actually buying them off developers, you're doing exactly the same, because otherwise they'd have gone on the market cheap. So are we looking at perhaps buying some of our old stock back, which we could probably either retrofit to a high standard, or even if it's been done, just rent out straight away for probably 100,000 less than it costs us to build them at the present moment?
I'll start to answer that and I'll hand over to Mr. Hendy. So in terms of that strategy, that's a strategy that we have executed on over the last 18 months. So we have, through the good officers that we've got, we've had access to local authority housing fund money, where we've, I believe it's 43, but it might be higher. I think it's 43 homes that we have purchased back, where we've been partially grant funded through the local homes advised local authority housing fund, and ostensibly under the schemes for rehousing and helping Ukrainian Afghan refugees. And so we've been very successful in phase 1 and phase 2 of that, getting grants for that and getting 43 homes. And some of those homes have been HMOs in areas such as Stanmore and within the city area, but equally it helped us purchase homes down in North Whiteley as well. And so we will continue that. So the government in its autumn statement announced a phase 3 of LAF, and I think the number was £450 million available through that fund, and we will definitely be looking to bid for more of that money and developing the business plan out to make good use of that, to specifically buy back new homes in the same way as we have in the previous rounds. Mr. Hendy, is there anything to add to that?
And the only thing to add is that acquiring properties at the moment, the subsidy that we're using to acquire properties is the right to buy 1-for-1 receipts, and there's a restriction on how many properties you can acquire with that source of funding. At the moment, it's about 20 a year. So although we're obviously looking at opportunities, and as Councillor Westwood said, looking at the local authority housing fund, we don't have total freedom of that because of the form of subsidy that we need to employ to actually purchase the properties. It's definitely something we will investigate.
Thank you. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. My question relates to the shared ownership rents and the cap of CPI plus 1%. I am very concerned that this cap is preventing us providing shared ownership properties, mainly because we have significant consented planning applications, one in my own ward, with a significant number of affordable homes. Now, the planning condition is that only 75% of that may be affordable. The remaining 25% must be shared ownership. Will this prevent the council building out those affordable homes? Or is there a way in which we can only take on the affordable element, leaving the shared ownership to somebody else? Have I made that clear?
Mr. Hendy,
Or is it too difficult?
Let me start, because I'm not sure Councillor Power fully understood the technicalities of that question. But on the slide, we talked about shared ownership and CPI plus 1%. The reason that is there is a change in government direction that said that shared ownership homes will move to a CPI plus 1% basis for all new shared ownership homes in future. We are in this review of the HRA, we are planning to take that change into account in the HRA and retrospectively apply it to I think it's 69 shared ownership properties that we have at the moment, and move them from RPI plus 1 to CPI plus 1, which actually reduces their rent. It's a lower
I
number.
understand that, Chair.
So
my concern was about the viability of future sites where there's a planning constraint on 25% being shared ownership, and whether we would be unable to move forward on those sites.
Shall I answer that, Chair? I don't know the detail of the site in terms of whether the obligation is providing the council service land we build them, or just a planning obligation to provide affordable housing. It's the latter. then the developer will be building the properties and an RP, could be the council even, will acquire them, and they'll acquire them at the price, including CPI at 1%. In terms of the future, the impact of CPI plus 1% is a planning obligation that, you know, those affordable housing units will be provided at that level for shared ownership. So the impact of that comes off the land value. So it won't affect viability. It means landowners could possibly receive less for their land if they're bringing it forward for development.
Thank you. Councillor Chip.
Thank you, Chair, and forgive me for winding the conversation all the way back to the housing management system. I guess I have a question which is related to that. So section 4.1, I think it is, of the report, workforce implication. If I've understood that correctly, that's proposing effectively a restructuring of the existing team and not a material reduction in the headcount of the team. And the reason I asked that is because of the earlier discussion around the digitisation of the service, if I can get my words out, versus the concept of there being a person on the end of the phone.
Shall I start that with my understanding? Let's go. That section there relates specifically to an area of the organisation that is currently being reorganised, and this is due to one of the fairly senior staff there leaving and the need to reorganise that area. And it is effectively, we are improving the reporting lines and the processes that go on in that area. So it's not directly related to the IT system change or review going forwards, but it is a reaction to wanting to provide more efficiency and effectiveness in that area of Mr. Enders and Mrs. Knight's organisation. Unless you care to say otherwise.
Yes, the restructuring proposals, to a certain extent, they're opportunistic. They are proposals that are subject to consultation with colleagues at the moment. We have identified posts that have been vacant for some considerable time and proposing deleting those posts. So there's no deletion of posts with people actually in them at this point in time doing work, as it were. The total amount of savings there, £318,000. Just over £200,000 of that are from the restructuring proposals, and the balance is from actually sieving through all existing budgets, identifying underspends in previous years and bring that forward.
Sandy. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. I had huge sympathy with the comments made by the TAC team this evening regarding those in our community of council house tenants who will struggle with the digital approach. Not that that's wrong, not at all, and I'm sure we all know that there is some system improvements that would wholeheartedly sort of lead us to, which is an important thing. However, what reassurances can you give us in terms of the reorganisation or the systems to ensure that if the digital approach is not one that people can actually manage well, that we will still have an opportunity to access our services in full in housing via other means, and that they will still be efficient. There won't be the second class sort of version of it, that there is still high expectation on service delivery. Thank you.
Chair, shall I pick that up? I think it's important. It was a very, very good challenge from Mr. Perkins earlier on the £2 million investment. I think we need to make it really clear that £2 million investment, if that £2 million, it's a one-off revenue provision. If that was used to redeem debt at 5%, that equates to £100,000 a year. If we're looking at a business case to invest in IT, we should be able to justify efficiencies of £100,000 a year from the investment in that IT. And if we can justify those efficiencies, then it will release resources for those households that need dedicated face-to-face support. So it's not an either or. We can be more efficient in one area and release resources to provide better services, those specifically need it that may not be able to use the digital service.
Thank you, Ms. Hendy. Councillor Westwood.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, because that was my former career, and in IT and business change and business process change, as is Councillor Chamberlain, I believe, in the same space as me. So there is other expertise sitting in this council and around this table, actually, which can help with this exercise. And the way that I would do this, and the way I'm sure it will be done, is that you have to look at all of your customer base and provide the right facilities for all of your customer base, not just pare down your services so only the privileged digitally enabled few can actually move forward. And within the council and with Councillor Becker's work as well, that is not a place we would move to. We would always want to be inclusive of anybody and provide the right accesses in the right way to include everybody in this. So I can assure you that all the time I'm sitting in this chair, that is the direction of travel we would take.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Press, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a quick question. I think rightly we can be very proud of the fact that we haven't lost sight of our commitment to the 1,000 houses, despite finding different ways to realise it in sort of macro headwinds. But sometimes it's useful to look outside and stop patting ourselves on the back. This might put Councillor Westwood on the spot, but I just wondered if he had any indication of how we benchmark against other district councils for our provision of affordable housing.
Okay, I don't have those figures sitting here, but I do know that we are in the top quartile of providing affordable housing across district authorities in England. And after this meeting, I will provide you with some of those numbers, but we are definitely up at the top table.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Just a question from myself in terms of the disposals. Ms. Hendy, I think you mentioned that obviously properties might be disposed of as they came out up in terms of voids. There are plots of land, I believe, that are also going to be disposed of over a period of time. Given the comments about sort of using that capital to offset and to increase our ability to procure housing, is there a reason why we're disposing of those over a period of time rather than doing it in a more immediate fashion?
So you mean scoop up all the individual plots and put them to market in one go, as opposed to release them?
Yeah, as I mean, just sort of dispose as more quickly than is maybe planned to be done.
Yes, I mean, we could do, I mean, we just modelled it on the basis of the values and being able to release a certain number every year, but we could look at identifying those plots at the moment and dispose of them more quickly. That's another opportunity.
Thank you. Councillor Miller, I think this might be the last question, and then we'll move on to the debate.
With those disposals, as we just outlined, will we be taking the effect on the community? If you small parcels of land may not be very good to build a house on, but they'd be quite important to the residents who live nearby. So will we look at not only the pure monetary value, but the value to the community as well?
I'm struggling a bit to answer. We will do initial work to establish whether the plot is viable in terms of development potential, because clearly there's no point putting it to the market unless we have that sort of knowledge. And if that is the case, although clearly we would respect the views of the community, there will be a certain value attached to it, and the council has a fiduciary duty to realise best consideration for its land. So it's not saying that we won't respect the views of the community, but clearly we would be expecting to get the requisite value for it if we went to market.
Thank you, Ms. Hendy. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of questions. I think if we can now move on to debate, ask if there's anybody who'd like to contribute to that part of the meeting. Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Chairman, I think producing this HRA budget is an immense achievement in the face of the adverse forces of the last 3 years. I'm particularly impressed with the commitment to go to digitalisation. However, you may wish to convene a non-digital user forum to check that we're actually meeting the needs of the residents that aren't readily accessing a smartphone, and indeed sometimes a landline because of hearing difficulties. I know your team are very well aware of the needs of tenants, and I would like them to be at the forefront of that. I'm also particularly delighted with the upgrades to the wastewater treatment plants at no cost to tenants, because the first two you're doing affect the river in my ward. So thank you. I'm very happy to support this budget.
Thank you, Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chair. I just echo Councillor Power's comments and say how proud I am that we are sticking to our commitments around providing 1,000 homes, and particularly from a tenant point of view, as per the questions I asked. I think the fact that we are not only providing more housing, making our housing more affordable to run, but supporting tenants in other ways, as outlined by Mrs. Knight, in the cost of living crisis, is to be commended, and I also support this in every way that I can.
Thank you, Councillor Prest. And was that Councillor Horwood?
Chair, thank you. And thank you to all the efforts that have gone in from the officer team, because this is clearly a balancing act, choices to be made, and some really important high-level objectives still being pursued. Councillor Westwood and I talked about the 1,000 homes many weeks ago, and I echo the other comments this evening that is a really important statement of intent from this council. And I don't think we should underestimate the significance of our HRA enterprise, as it were, and all those homes and those communities that we support in the district. And I don't think we should underestimate the complexity of that. There are so many pieces of the puzzle and the spinning plates. We've made some very clear intentions about retrofit and decent home standards and repairs, all to be commended. But there are many, many other elements within the HRA that we have to manage. And so I think it is good to give us the various options. I'm sure some of these will evolve and there's still more detail as we get through to approving this in the new year in terms of the very specific actions. But I think it's fair to say at this point, this is a budget and an outline of intent that most of us who have the HRA in our hearts think that we could support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. I echo many of the comments already made and therefore won't repeat them. I think it's just particularly noteworthy that in this business case, there is effectively, there's a challenge in any business case in producing a longer term forecast, particularly for this one with the near term economic challenges that we're facing, and also then balancing a greener, faster agenda. It is not I would imagine, a tricky balance to strike. But I think it's been done so impressively in the report that we've seen this evening, and I echo the comments made.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll conclude the debate at that point. I think in terms of the conclusion, I think we were particularly interested in the area of the digitalisation, making sure that that is acceptable and available. That the access to the services are still available to all in whatever form is appropriate for them, and obviously the evolving discussions over the wastewater treatment plants and the access to and the cost recovery. And how that will actually be then represented in the final report. So I think we'll just move on then and look then at the recommendation and just put that to a vote. The recommendation was that the policy committee had asked to note and comment on the policy options for the 2024-25 housing revenue account, rent setting and the HRA business plan. So I think just put that, I'm not sure how we do this, but whether we actually vote on that, because it doesn't seem that there's much of a recommendation there. But I just, in terms of the formality, asking just to acknowledge that, please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Westwood, Mrs. Knight. Mr. Henry, I assume you're staying. Okay. If we now move on to the next item, which is item 7. This is the festivals and events programming policy, and call upon Councillor Thompson to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Right, I've got everything in order now. I'm very pleased to be presenting this paper to the Policy Committee today. Our district very much welcomes a whole variety of festivals, including some really, really large events. Boomtown is just one of those. At different locations in our city and also across the wider district. And these festivals make a valuable contribution to the vibrancy of our district. They form part of our culture, contribute to our visitor economy and help to improve health and well-being of our residents, because obviously if you go along to a festival, it's enjoyable to do so. So they are hugely important on a number of fronts. And the number of festivals has grown over the years from a sort of just 7 to around 30 now. So the paper before you discusses how we might strengthen our offer and also review the approach to how we might better support organisations who wish to stage an event, whether they are a small local group or a large national organisation. The paper before you is very much a working paper, and we want to have your views around how we might improve this offer and improve our attractiveness to event organisers, as well as compare favourably with our competitors. In putting this paper together, the Festivals in Winchester Group, as well as organisers of events too, were asked whether they found our processes easy to navigate. And the answer was that they did not. It was really clear that there was a lack of continuity of approach, particularly if the event organisers had to contact a number of different council departments. So a number of immediate improvements have already been put in place, and the paper does set out what those are. But one, for example, in paragraph 2.13, you will see that we now have a single point of contact who will coordinate applications, offer advice and signposting, as well as try and sort out any clashes with dates. We've also updated our web page explaining the process from start to finish, and there is a link in the paper that you can try out and see what we've done there. We've also been taking a fresh look at the terms and conditions of hiring council land. Inevitably, some of the large events involve a huge clean-up operation following the event, and this often falls to the council. And the cost of that clean-up has generally not been factored in. So going forward, we would like to ensure that we can achieve greater cost recovery. However, we're really well aware that this needs to be handled sensitively and delivered and flexibly as well, and delivered on a case-by-case basis to ensure that organisations are treated fairly within the framework. So this is the start of the process for creating an easier process for organisations to follow who wish to hold an event. And once fully developed, it will really improve our competitiveness with surrounding local authority areas. And it will help drive our visitor economy, as well as leading to greater pride in place. Our engagement and consultation as part of the cultural strategy has already highlighted that festivals are a key priority. So once we have this committee's thoughts and feedback, further work on this aspect will form part of the cultural strategy, which we are looking to adopt in 2024. And any further work on improving what we have to offer and how events and festivals are organised will also, the work to do that will also be taking place through the cultural strategy. So I know the team is happy to take the committee's thoughts and any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Lee, I just wondered if you would like to ask a question on this topic at this point before we move into questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, rightly, we should celebrate the rich, diverse culture we have in Winchester District, with the many festivals and events in various locations throughout the year. Great opportunity for our communities and visitors to experience. And as you've said, good for local economy and good for well-being. So excellent. A refreshed approach is therefore welcome to enable Winchester District to develop and strengthen its offer. And I also welcome the declaration that no additional resources are required for the review and the subsequent proposals outlined in this report. This sends a sensible message to our residents, which is important in these times of austerity. Additionally, promoting a curated event calendar aligning with council priorities on sustainability is equally welcome. However, it appears there is minimal mention of going greener faster or the nature emergency, which are meant to be at the core of the council's prior policies. Low carbon, high nature should be our watchwords for everything we do. So can I ask, what can be done to make events and festivals greener, which will also improve the attractiveness? For example, you might want to consider banning single-use plastics or offering discounts to folk who use low-carbon transport to travel to events. There's little in the report at the moment that addresses these needs. So no doubt, I'm sure the committee and officers will have some better ideas than what I've suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lee, for your comments and also your support for improving our offer, because I, you know, as I said in my opening remarks, I really do think that the festivals offer a huge, well, that they're great for our city and for our market towns. They encourage people to visit, and also if it's on your doorstep, you're more likely to go, and rather than travel elsewhere. I like what you're saying about greener faster, and I certainly think single-use plastics, we certainly could, I don't know, I'm looking to my Mr. Costello for a comment on this, but I certainly think that we should be encouraging we should not be encouraging the use of single-use plastics. I suppose that's what I'm saying. And also, yes, transport, of course. As I've said, if a festival is on your doorstep, I think you're more likely to go and enjoy it, and hopefully you'll use your, you know, sustainable travel to get there at the same time. Mr. Costello, have you got any comments to make?
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Yeah, I've got a couple of comments, and I'll also refer to Ms. Hickman as well, who's led a lot of this work as well and has a number of views. And just to sort of reiterate, you know, this is part of a journey, so we're certainly not at the destination yet in terms of any of these points, let alone any points around green credentials and sustainability, but it is very much in front of mind of the work that we're doing and how we're looking at how we fit our own greener, faster agenda, and indeed how other local authorities have adopted those principles around their approaches as well going forward. And there's a number of different opportunities through the programming policy that we would like to develop and come forward, where we would be looking at certain criteria that would attract and influence changes of behaviour of our event organisers and event and festival organisers going forward, and also deter some of those practices that we wouldn't like, and that might be through some free structure work that we do, but also in terms of influencing good behaviour. And one of the things also to be cognizant of is that the council has a degree of influence and a degree of power over its own land and what it does. But what this paper also looks to start to address, and what we would certainly plan to develop in the future, is a code of conduct that we would use as a piece to encourage other landowners and other festival organisers, and that would also include green credentials. But as I said, we may have some further comments to add.
Thank you for the comments. They're very much appreciated. In the event management guidance, we did add a section on sustainability that wasn't previously in there, and a lot of the things you've suggested around single-use plastic and thinking about local suppliers and travel and things are all listed in there as considerations that event organisers should be thinking about. And actually earlier this month, I took a couple of colleagues from Sustrans and our sustainability team to the festivals in Winchester meeting. And we had a big session, a conversation around sustainability and how we can incentivise audiences to travel sustainably and things like that. So it's very much at the forefront and a big discussion that we are currently in the process of having.
Thank you. Just before we go into questions, I'd like to draw us attention to the fact that we have 3 recommendations that we're being asked to look at. So we're being asked to look at the refreshed approach to the engagement between organisers and the council, the approach to improve cost recovery, and also the potential and practicalities in adopting an overarching curated programme of festivals and events across the district. Just wondering if we could take those one at a time, so that we actually sort of ask the questions on each of those in turn. So are there questions around the refreshed approach? And we'll actually sort of look at that as an item so that we can sort of focus on that. Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. I think one point of contact and bringing all the disparate parts of the council operation together is an excellent idea. As an event organiser, navigating my own council as to how to get things organised for an activity, I know the other side of it, and I welcome the approach. I suppose my question is, Councillor Thompson says there's no sort of resource implication, but I question whether someone who is an assistant with other responsibilities, if we're going to do this properly, whether that is a realistic outcome, whether that individual can realistically be that point of contact and filter people into the system effectively, whether we can do that in a good way. So the principle is good, but just making sure the practicalities are realistic about how we can deliver that service.
Yeah, I wonder whether Mr. Costello might want to respond to that one.
So, I mean, this is this part of it is a test pilot to see. So we will be sort of led by how that sort of operates over the coming months. We should also remember that the VIC assistant that's looking at this is part of a wider VIC team as well. So we wouldn't be necessarily just looking at one individual. There would be a group of people that would have involvement and training, but it would be led by one individual. And also, certainly through the work that Ms. Hickman has done, is that, you know, we've recognised the difficulty in navigating, but there is a great encouragement from colleagues and officers across the council to work together, and therefore as a consequence of that, I think that with just a little bit of glue added by this officer engagement, I think that, you know, things will come quite naturally in terms of enabling others to work. But as I said, we're monitoring it, we're trying it with this level of resource at the moment, and we'll see how we go. And I think it's the most important that we actually prioritise also the level of coordination we're giving to certain events as well. So making sure that certainly event organisers that have never worked with us previously perhaps dealt in a certain way, whereas others, we have some that are very experienced at navigating their way through that we can handle in a different way too.
Yes, Councillor.
Chair, could I just ask a supplementary, and it was a thought for those of us who might be on a repeat event. We're used to doing our village fete and we know we need to close the road and have a licence. Is there something where you're sort of renewing your process? You're doing exactly the same as you did last year and the year before, that we can make that simpler for people. So in this new process, those who are on repeat business, is there a shortcut?
I think absolutely, and that's about us through the policy and our operation procedures recognising the nature of the actual event that's coming forward, and that's why we're suggesting the implementation of a notification form, so we know absolutely everything that is happening, and then we can then either fast track certain events that are sort of seasoned events, and they know, we know what's happening, versus others that need a little bit more hand holding.
Yeah. Just coming back on that, absolutely, yes, that's one of the the things that I would really love to see, because I know other organisations that have that they do exactly the same each year. They basically know the process, but of course they still have to jump through all those hurdles, and it does seem a bit crazy when we could really just circumvent all of that and have one form and one point of contact that then says yes or no. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eve.
Thank you, Chair. Following up on the note of the single point of contact and triage, very pleased to see that. I was wondering what sort of process is in place for residents to feed back into that. I'm aware we have a lot of festivals in St Bart's at North Walls, which is really good to see, but inevitably there is impacts on the local area and some feedback from residents. So I was wondering if it'd be possible to hear about that, and also how ward councillors can be brought into that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Councillor. We will need to do some engagement on North Walls or River Park, as I think it's now being called, and certainly we would like to do that before we sort of really embed the policies. But as you see, there's a section in here that sort of says, well, should we limit the events on North Wall or River Park, sorry, River Park, perhaps we ought to do this, but obviously there are other areas certainly in the city that used to hold events, and one of them is Orange Harbour, and they were actually residents up there were really quite upset when the Hat Fair on the Sunday was then moved to River Park, and it may be that they would quite welcome the odd event up there, and also obviously we've got Abbey Gardens too. We had the Light Festival there earlier this year, and that could also be another event area, if you like. I don't know whether you want to add anything.
And just to reiterate, we would certainly look at engagement, as we've just described there, and Councillor Thompson described, around the development of the policy and the criteria. And then once that is firmed down, it would then be, as officers, we would be implementing that policy. So the engagement would have happened at the policy creation time. The intention is not for it to be happening each time we get, or on occasion when we get a certain application. We'll be adopting the policy against those applications and how we manage them.
Just a question from myself in terms of the form that you're anticipating using. Is that across the district, and is it for all events that are anticipated sort of to be happening across the district? And what sort of information are you looking to actually gain from it? I know that there was a paper that came to, I think, one of the previous committees where there was actually not sufficient or not very much evidence about, sort of the events that we have held to, sort of bring into that policy, that particular paper. So what level of information are you looking for from the organisers for this particular, sort of form?
I'll start the first point. Yes, the plan is to implement that notification form across the district and for all events and festivals within the scope of what we're looking at here, and that will then provide us as officers a true reflection of the type, the size, the scale, and the geographic spread of what happens across our district, and how we can then use our programming policy to look at gaps, etc., and move towards a wider, broader, more diverse but appropriate range of events and festivals across the district for all of the things that we said in terms of community social benefit and economic value. But Emmeline has worked particularly on the notification form, so she'll be able to answer the more detail in relation to that.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's still in development, but the idea is that it, again, is this one-stop shop kind of thing, so that it can be used to assess whether or not it needs to go through the safety advisory group. It can be assessed on whether or not it needs a license and all these sorts of things. So it will be a fairly simple set of questions. Yes, I'd like to do this. No, I don't want to do that. And then from that point, we can guide them in the right direction and say, in that case, you'll need to do X, Y, and Z as a one-stop shop. And then we can develop that. So then that streamlines the process from start to finish for both the organiser and us as authority as well.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. When you instigate that process, which I think is a great plan, by the way, could I ask that you asked the question about proximity to SSSIs and SACs? I notice in the text of the report there's a reference to that risk, and I think it would be a good heads up to organisers that they have to actually think about damage to the environment before they go forward with their plan, because we have seen some events on inappropriate sites. Would that be right?
I'm sure that's something we can consider, definitely.
Yes, I completely agree, actually, Councillor Power, and that's why really we're needing to have a proper programme of festivals so we know what's taking place where, and also whether we do need to factor in any. I mean, we go on to cost recovery if it all falls to the council, and the ground, for instance, has been churned up and is unusable for many weeks afterwards. So they are definitely things that we need to factor in this.
I think just to add to that, I think the sooner we, for an event organizer and a festival organizer, the sooner that we make sure that they are aware of those considerations in the process, the better. There's a responsibility on the festival organizer, and we want to make sure that they have that knowledge and they have that responsibility. But there's equally a responsibility we feel on us as officers to help them make sure they're aware, and so we don't get to an event plan that is then in front of the safety advisory group all the way down that line before we've had an earlier intervention, and that is one of the founding principles of this notification.
Thank you. I just want, in terms of the actual form and the process, have you done any sort of research with existing organisations or existing festival organisers to see what their reaction is to the form and the process that you're proposing?
Not at this stage, no. We have spoken to some of the organisers in terms of what their frustrations and struggles are, and this kind of one form has come about as a little bit of a suggestion on how we might mitigate some of those challenges.
Thank you very much. Okay, if we can now move on to any questions around the approach to improve the cost recovery in respect of changes. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. You won't be surprised. I've got a few on this subject. First of all, I'd like to know to what degree we aren't recovering our costs at the moment, because I always like to have a number. And secondly, I accept there should be differential pricing for commercial, community and charitable organisations. However, could we ensure that when we do discount, or as I think subsidise, some events, we ensure that we make sure that cost is set to our grant programme? I have a feeling, well, I'm absolutely confident, that we have all sorts of little concessions to community organisations throughout the council. I'm very keen that we should have those properly accounted for. And I'd like some reassurance on that, please.
Thank you.
In terms of the level of current cost recovery, I couldn't give you that answer here, if I'm honest. But I know the work that we have done and the review that we've had with a number of officers across the local authority, we have been seeking a better understanding, but I wouldn't say we're 100%. And we are looking through this paper and this work to certainly greater the cost recovery and much closer to 100% where we possibly can. And it's really to understand that there are two, often with cost recovery, there are these hidden costs that we don't always consider, and that we are coming to it from that point of view that it's not just that one bit, it's those other ramifications. So we want to be very clear on that. So that's very much in forefront of our mind as we move forward with this piece of work, to get that as in the best and healthiest position as we can in terms of cost recovery. In terms of the commercial and charitable status, yes, Councillor Hay, absolutely right. There is a lack of consistency in certain areas of what we do, and again, it's an absolute ambition to bring a consistency and a transparency around that whole piece as well, and that we all follow the agreed programme and policies going forward.
Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. I think an improvement on the cost recovery is important. I seem to recall looking at probably our major festival in the area that we were clearly putting significant staffing resources in and not being paid at all for that resource. So I think the reality is that in certain cases we have to be really quite strict with ourselves, that if we're going to support an event in a very significant way, then we should be expected to be recompensed for that. The other piece is the sort of clean-up operation and disruption that comes. And if I think about the post-festival that we're sort of known for locally, and the disruption and the rubbish and the just general wear and tear that then came to some of our transport hubs as a consequence as people left the area. And I just wonder, who's picking up that bill? Who is actually paying for that? So those are some of the hidden things. And I think we need to just be very clear, particularly on those larger events, that we're not sidestepping that because perhaps they've had a reasonably lucrative run so far, but actually there are costs getting them to the point of the event, but there's actually quite a lot that happens afterwards, and I'm not sure we truly annotate, and I'd be encouraged to know whether you're picking some of that up as you look at the process and what you're trying to achieve. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, we are absolutely looking at all of those areas, because as you say, there's one thing setting up of the event and then there's the clearance at the end, and it isn't necessarily just confined to the site. Yeah, so yes, we will definitely be looking at all of that, and well, the one we're all thinking of it has enormous consequences for our officers at the council, who do spend an enormous amount of time and energy, which of course is we're not gaining any financial benefit from that, as I understand it. So yeah, it's definitely something we'll be looking at.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
If we're going to look at recovering our costs, which I agree we should, will we also be taking into account when we do these festivals and these cleanups, what it's costing other authorities like Hampshire County Council? I can think of another festival, not the one you're talking about, where the damage to the verges and the roads was incredible this year when it was so wet. And quite frankly, there's about 5 miles of verges all around. It was totally destroyed by people parking where they shouldn't.
Certainly through the work that we're doing, we are not confining this just to the district council. I mean, that is clearly our priority, but the work that Ms Hickman has been doing in terms of the research has been well beyond us, and we've been looking at other local authorities and how they've been reacting to these challenges across the district, but across the county, but then equally about the other authorities that impact our own district, such as Hampshire County Council. We would continue and having that open dialogue, so we have a really true and transparent reflection of what really is involved in that event and festival, what really is the impact and what really is the cost, and how can that be the best mitigated.
I'd just like to make a comment coming back to the discount levels. I sit on the grants panel for the town forum and also for the district, and often those budgets are underutilised. I would echo Councillor Power's comment that I think rather than you as a part of the organisation deciding on discount levels, that working in conjunction with those grant panels, actually working with the organisations, the charities, or the sort of community groups, to actually encourage them to actually then apply for grants to support the actual work that they're doing. And as an organisation, we're actually then presenting to, whether it be a commercial or a community organisation, the same costs that they then have to bear, because at the end of the day, we are going to incur the same costs in terms of the actual event being run. So I can understand you having a sort of small, medium and large type of festival and charging accordingly, but actually then to subdivide that into, sort of a commercial, a community and then a charity, just seems to be a lot of sort of work that you're doing, and you're then having to carry that in terms of the sort of costs within the council itself. So I think I would suggest that there be a sort of cleaner and more clear cost sort of to the external organisations, and that we use other mechanisms that we have within the council for supporting our charities and our community organisations to put those events on. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's something we could certainly take on board and look at, because obviously that would help the charities to actually still, put on an event and actually, if you like, have a grant to have for the, well, basically the clean-up operation at the end. It's definitely something we could look at. I suppose it depends how big these events are, and what would be the likelihood of the cost of the operation, basically.
And again, reflecting on, I think both Councillor Horrell and Councillor Miller, there's a lot of costs associated, or a lot of impact on our environment through some of the things that are used to advertise these events. I know that sort of on certain lampposts there are 6 months after some of these events, there are still the advertising hoardings for the actual event itself. Is there a way that we could include as part of this, if the land is sort of owned by the council, some sort of bond that is only returnable once there is evidence of the cleanup that's actually been undertaken, in the same way as when you rent a property, you actually have a bond, and there is an exit report which actually says what standards it's been left in, and if it's clear, then you can actually get the bond back. If not, then there's a proportion of that money that's then reserved for then that activity. So, and that bond might be then outstanding for, sort of a period of time, so that there's time for them to actually then clean up, or if it's necessary for the council or its contractors to do likewise.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea.
Yes, thank you.
Chair, can I just say,
Yes.
I live on in an area where there are lots of events, and it is my constant complaint that the posters and the notices stay and no one comes back to take them down. And that isn't actually very kind to the community who welcome them in for their event, and then weeks later we're chasing them to come and remove all their debris and their cardboard and signs. So I think that's has some merit in a very broad sense. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's no further on cost recovery, if we move on to the last aspect, which was the practicalities in not adopting an overarching programme of festivals and events across the district. Are there any questions around that particular? Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's a really good proposal to bring this together. However, there are questions in the report about the possibilities of losing out to new events and perhaps not providing that dynamism of the programme. And I'd be really interested to hear about how you're going to manage that dilemma. Maybe that's work in progress. I can understand that. Could I also ask, are you intending to consult the parishes on this? And if so, will the pro forma actually say, will there be any impact on local residents or businesses, and how do you plan to mitigate this? Thank you.
So I think that's a very good point about impacts on residents. I had said earlier to Councillor Eve that, in terms of the consultation with those would be around the actual programming policy. But I think you raise a good point that actually a specific event could have, and I think that would be a relevant question that we ought to consider within the notification form, that we make sure that event organisers have thought of those impacts and how they might mitigate them. Can you just repeat your first question? And I think it was in relation to dynamism of the actual programme. But
yeah, yes, there's a risk identified in the report, and I'm going to come back to the risks when we get to debate. That you want to have a new, you don't want to rule out any new events coming forward, and there's a tension there between allowing the existing events, which are very much valued by the communities, and preventing a change in our programme. Would you like me to find out where it refers to that in the paper and come back to it later? I think so.
Are you?
Well, isn't this all about, the need to actually have a proper programming, sort of, diary, if you like, and so that if people, if an organizer comes along and wants to suggest a different event, then obviously one would hope that we would try and persuade them to do it over a period where that it didn't clash with another one, or that we said, well, you need to go and, why not take that event to Alresford, wherever. And I guess this is where a single point of contact who has all the information to hand can be really helpful.
I just add to that. Sorry, I was being rather dense with your question. Sorry. So yeah, certainly, the whole nature of that programming piece of work is, as Councillor Thompson said, we will have a level of that information through the notification process. But what we will have as professional curators of festivals, events, programs, and have doing research from other destinations and what they have been doing, we will then be able to see where the gaps are geographically, date-wise, in offer-wise, and then we will be able to work proactively appropriately to look to attract other festivals and events that complement what we already have, because we don't want to lose, you know, the amazing program of events that have been developed over the last decade, but we want to see where those gaps are and where there's gaps in diversity and broadness and depth, and how we can then work proactively to fill some of those gaps, and that is the whole nature and the purpose of that programming and curation policy.
And also, if I could just add, having this programme and knowing where all these events are taking place at any one time means that we can actually promote them as well on our Visit Winchester site, which obviously covers the whole district too. So, you know, it's a two-way thing.
Thank you. Can I just ask then, following up on that, what level of resource you will have within the team to do that proactive management and proactive sort of identification of events that are in the gaps and locations that might then benefit from having different events? So what resource in the team is going to be available to do that?
So that's where we move from sort of the operational element that will be dealt with by the Visitor Information Centre to more of a strategic process, and that's where it comes into Ms Hickman's role in terms of Culture and Creative Sector Officer to as part of the cultural strategy, and this is where the clear link is. And as we've said earlier, festivals and events is becoming as an emerging priority within that strategy to work with stakeholders and to work with other parties to bring about those sort of opportunities for our district. But it starts off with making it most appropriate and most easy and most easy to engage in the process to start off with, which is why we started with the operational bit, and then the strategic bit about bringing others to the table to have conversations with us should be sort of made easy as a result of that. But that's where that sort of resource will sit.
Thank you. Any Councillor?
Chair, thank you. 2.28, you talk about the ambition to support festivals and events and to be more diverse in the geography, and I absolutely support the points made there, but actually driving that diversity and stretch across the district, I think, is probably harder to do than particularly as if you're balancing commercial versus non, and how might we approach that? Just a question as to where we're going to drive that influence, and just saying we're not promoting their event, I'm not sure is necessarily going to do it. And then the other thought I had, Chair, around this whole piece is that part of this is about data and mapping and understanding where we are. So, you know, where are the facts that will then help us drive that move forward? And also, I think you touched on it, Chair, yourself, but I'd be sort of thinking that some of this we need to do a bit of a test market on. You mentioned the form, but, you know, testing it out on those who have to do it as part of your learning process, which you're already doing as a sort of trial with the resources in the Visitor Information Centre and the VIC. That, I think, is there's more here as you're evolving, as Councillor Thompson said, you're developing this as you go forward, that we could do some more testing. So data, the mapping, the testing, and how we're going to drive that programme and that laudable objective, but actually across the diversity of organisations that would cross your path.
So I'll start off by answering some of that. So in terms of the test marketing, we have a very strong and effective and engaged Festivals in Winchester group, which Ms Hickman is regularly in dialogue with, and we would continue to use that group as a test case for these processes going forward, because it is most important that we actually have a way of working that is of a significant change and improvement for where we are now, and this needs to be led by event organisers and festival organisers as much as it does with us in terms of meeting the needs and priorities of our policy. And then I think, you know, through the cultural strategy and our engagement with stakeholders and those emerging themes, and that collaborative strategy is all about looking at behaviours and looking at approaches, and through that we will look to influence what happens across the district as a whole. And I think that's sort of the mechanism that I think we'd be looking at to sort of achieve that. And then again, certainly within the cultural strategy, Ms. Hickman's brought about a whole series of data and evidence, and we'll be using that data and evidence to influence our thinking around the programming going forward as well. So I think there's a number of different measures and indicators and influence we would be using to encourage those sort of adoption of behaviours that we're looking for. And that's where we said about, you know, across the district, how we would be adopting a code of conduct, where we would be using that as a mechanism to influence and to bring on board other landowners about sort of what's happening on their land, etc. If you've got anything to add to that.
Chair, can I just ask, in terms of representation, are we happy that we've got, you know, the big to the small, as it were, that your representation covers all shapes and sizes, shall we say? They're not all festivals, they might just be small events, community, but just have you got that diverse input to make sure that we're addressing the broadest possible scope, particularly as we're trying to get out perhaps to New and to the wider district?
Certainly the Festivals of Winchester group is city and beyond, and it is facilitated in partnership with the BID, but certainly the work that Ms Hickman has done, we've got a broad database now of you know, a lot of different levels and types of festival events and community events, etc. And so we can use that knowledge again to test some of the principles that we are wanting to sort of bring about. But it's a growing one, so again that's the reason for the notification process, for us to then continue to add to the richness of those contacts and that database, to then continue that sort of dialogue going forward.
Yeah, and I can add that the certainly the database surrounding the stakeholders that have been involved in the cultural strategy. There's a huge range of organisations there, from very large to really quite small. And I mean, for instance, I think it's the Poetry Festival. There is a representative that comes along to the cultural strategy stakeholder meetings. And I mean, I haven't seen, I've been to a number of meetings, but I certainly haven't met everybody who I know is on the database and who we've consulted to basically gather information for the cultural strategy. So, yeah. I would just confirm that we have an enormous number of organisations that we can tap into.
And I think that's why we want to do this last piece of work in terms of the programming and to the curation work through the cultural strategy development platform, because we've got that robust and depth of relationships already created. So it makes sense that, you know, it's part of that and it's an emerging priority as well.
My,
Very
quick, but I was just thinking.
Last one, and we'll then go to debate.
I was just thinking in terms of sort of quantity. You know, we have so many villages and activities, whether it's a fete or a street party or whatever. You know, in terms of the scope of this, I know you could orientate to, you know, the food festivals and some of these and some of the bigger, but actually, probably I question, you know, is the majority those smaller events that happen in a diverse range of communities, and therefore just to make sure, as we were saying earlier, that we've got everyone represented, because, you know, the heart of what we have around the outside of the city is about those probably smaller events and a different shape of activity, not really a festival, but more of an event, as it were.
Well, I think this is what we're really trying to get a gauge on, if you like, because at the moment there is no programming. Events seem to sort of just happen. And of course, there's a lot of process that takes place behind the scenes to actually get those events happening. But certainly, I think it's our wish that we do know what's going on throughout the district in the smaller communities too. And obviously, if they're slightly larger, then yes, we would, they do really need to be programmed in. But I don't think we're adverse to, small village events either. We would like to know what is going on in order for us to help the organisers for a start, so it's a much easier process for them to go through should they need road closures or take over a piece of land that is possibly city council land. I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm pretty sure that's our aim.
Yeah,
So
we would
good
want
spread.
we'd want to support across the piece, and it's recognising that through the cultural programming and some of those behaviours that we'd like to adopt, it's not always looking at the larger ones. It's also looking at which may be fewer. It's actually looking at the many as well. So some small changes with lots and lots of different events, more community events, will bring about a wider and bigger change across the district as well. So we recognise that, but I think there will be different levels of engagement subject to the type and size and scale of the events as well. We have to be realistic, given we have said that we're not extending resource. So it's to get that measure and balance correct as well.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, looking at 2.25D, we talk about parish councils may have their own policies and have no obligation to adopt Winchester, which is fine. But are we going to try to help parish councils by making them aware of our policies and maybe give them guidance so people, not only parish councils, but people organising events have got policies to start from? Because I think of a few events I've been to where, quite frankly, they didn't work out how big they were going to get, and chaos ensued on the day in various villages of traffic chaos because nobody thought about how much parking they needed, amongst other things. I think it'd be useful if we could help the parish council or organisers very early on so they can look at what the problems are, decide if they should even start to organise the event.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be an expectation of what we're trying to do here is that we would be bringing about a policy and a curated programme that we would encourage our parishes to adopt, and we'd be wanting to work with them on what we have learned and have best practice sharing across the district.
If I can just add as well, that's kind of why we have the two sets of guidance, because there's almost two sets of things going on. So you've got the real event management guidance, which is your really big events that need to think about everything. And then there's the step-by-step guide. I've never run an event before. I've got no idea what to think about. There's a big old list in there of these are all the things to think about. And it was kind of that kind of parish level that actually that guidance is really useful for them as well. So that's kind of that split to some extent needs to happen because you've got different considerations depending on what level event we're talking about. So that's why there's now two bespoke pieces, which there is some crossover obviously in the two, but the level of consideration is slightly different.
Thank you very much. And I can ask members now if we just move on to debate, if there's any items for debate. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a big step forward and I think it's going to be great, actually, a great improvement. However, there are certain places in this report where you have identified risks. And I think if those risks were brought together into a risk management table towards the beginning of the document, it would help you to see common solutions or common mitigation measures to identified risks. It should be a standard part of any report that comes to committees, and I think you would benefit if you brought those together in one place. Thank you.
happy to do that going forward. As far as I'm aware, these policy papers don't have a risk section, but certainly the others do. And when we take this forward and we move this programme on, when it comes into different forums for this consideration, it most definitely would have a risk register with it.
Thank you very much. Any other debate? Councillor Horrell.
Oh, Chair, thank you. A really interesting initiative from the team, and I think some real help and progress that could be made. And obviously, we're looking to drive economic growth in the district. So that if we can do that and support organisations, I think that's really positive. It's clearly sort of evolving, and I think, you know, the constant dialogue with all of us so that we get a better understanding of what you're finding out, what's working, as you move this along into the programming for the cultural strategy. I think that would be really helpful, because I'm sure all of the councillors get touched by festivals and events in some way in our various wards that we represent. And so I think this is probably something we should all know and understand pretty well. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. Again, echo some of the previous comments. Just to, we touched on in a few points the kind of the balance between the resource contention, should we say, versus then how do we get out into the parishes and the villages and understand the totality of what's going across the district. I guess my observation would be, the value there is kind of whether there's anything that can be done in terms of, dare I say, providing cookie cutter or generic type toolkits out to the parishes, to villages, that then they can use as a point of reference for recurring events and events that happen through districts. I just struggle in my mind to see how a single point of contact can engage with everyone, but I absolutely can see value if there was kind of a common toolkit there that could be used by multiple stakeholders over and over again. That would actually really bring value.
Thank you. I'd just like to add and echo my comments and compliments, because I think it's a fantastic opportunity to get a handle on where we are with our festivals and events, actually understand, you know, the level of those that we have in the district already, to understand then how we can actually make sure that we are recovering our costs, which in the current environment is very critical to the council. But then also to use the information that we then gain to cross-fertilise and to feed back into the community, and to encourage or to identify areas where there are gaps and there are elements of festivals that may be running in one part of the district that could be useful for other parts to benefit from. So I think that whole aspect of reusing and education is welcome and very, you know, sort of thoughtful in terms of the way it's going to be used within the district. So thank you very much for that. Right, so I think we'll just summarise in terms of the three items. I think in terms of the refreshed approach and the engagement between organisers, there was just a slight concern in terms of the one point of contact and the amount of resource that might, you know, sort of entail, particularly as it then sort of gets out into the parishes and, you know, sort of the levels of events that might then need to be coordinated. There was a concern or question to ensure that we get feedback, so not just the actual work in terms of the preparatory stage, but actually after the event, you know, what feedback do we get from residents and from councillors to make sure that events don't just perpetuate, but, you know, because if there are issues with the local residents, that those are then taken into account and fed back either to the organisers or to within the council as an organisation. In terms of cost recovery, there's a question in terms of what the actual costs are at the moment. So in terms of the report, it would be worthwhile understanding what our baseline is in terms of how we're actually achieving that at the moment. Then some queries about the discount levels that you're potentially offering to community organisations and to charities. Make sure that we actually cover all of the costs in terms of not just the material cost or the sort of infrastructure cost, but then the cost to the public realm and to the areas around the actual events and festivals. And to understand what wider implications there might be to other authorities like Hampshire County Council in terms of those costs as well. And then in terms of the actual overarching programme, it was to ensure that we actually consult with the parishes and to actually make sure that we, on the impact on local residents, about the encouraging events to fill the gaps, and feedback and advice to councils to sort of ensure that they are aware of some of the recommendations that we have in terms of how to approach festivals and events in their particular areas. So those are the feedback from the committee. Again, I just ask again for the committee to vote on that. Can I just ask for you to give your agreement to those as recommendations or comments on the paper that's been brought to us? Councillor Powell.
Chairman, did we not say we'd ask that the impact on triple SIs and SACs be assessed as part of the application?
My apologies. I think I may have forgotten that one or missed that one at the beginning. So if we can add that as well, then.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if you can just ask us to agree that. Thank you very much. Right, and after that we go on to our final item, which is item 8, to note the work programme for remainder of 22-23, which actually is just the one meeting we have left in February. And at the moment we have on that the older person accommodation scoping report, the accommodation strategy for homeless households, the Green Economic Development Strategy, Action Plan 2024-27, the Winchester District Cultural Strategy, and Housing Engagement and Communication Plan. So there's quite a few items on that agenda, so I think it'll be a longish meeting. But thank you all for your perseverance and the time here at the committee, giving feedback on the 2 papers we've had this evening. So thank you very much. And meeting closed at 8:42. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.